I will ask my question in French.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Je voudrais juste poser une petite question à Monsieur Pulinets. Et je voudrais savoir comment ils font d'abord techniquement pour mesurer le taux d'ionisation provoqué par le radon dans l'atmosphère et comment ils arrivent à séparer
How can they separate the rate of ionization provoked by the radon and the one of the cosmic rays?
Okay, if you can translate once more to me, how I can distinguish between the ionization produced by radon and by what else?
How do you do to evaluate first the rate of ionization provoked by the radon? What is the technical measurement? How? And secondly, how can you separate what is produced by the radon from what is produced from the cosmic rays?
Okay. As concerns the radon ionization, the measurements of radon are made in becquerels. Becquerels, it is one decay per second. So usually the activity of radon in the seismically active areas, it is something like 2,000 becquerels per second per meter cubic. From this, you know that radon emits the alpha particles with energy 5.8 mega electron volts. And ionization potential for the majority of atmospheric gases is from 10 to 15 to 20 electron volts. So you can calculate how many electron-ion pairs are produced by one alpha particle. You multiply for the activity of radon, you obtain the volumetric number of ions. And I did not talk about this. The more intensive the rate of ionization, the more stable are clusters and more longer their life. So they have ability to grow to the larger particles. And I did not told also that energetic effectivity of this process, why I compared it with bomb. Because if you relate of the energy released by the particle which growth to the size, say, 3 microns, which is a particle of the not cloud, it is smaller than the particle of the cloud. But we measured such particles experimentally. To energy spent to ionize this particle, we obtained the number 10 powered 8. So you can imagine the number and energy released by this process. And this energy is prepared for us by sun, because sun produces the water vapor in air. So the radon itself does not produce a lot of energy. It is some kind of catalytic process. We only give the centers of ionization to release this heat which is already in the water vapor. How we detect? For example, the database of NOAA satellites has something like more than 20 years. So we calculate the average level for the given area, for the given local time, for the given day, for the 20 years. So we calculate the background. Then we calculate the standard deviation. And then we look if this, what we register, exceed the standard deviation or 2 standard deviation. We can say that such level of the heat was never observed in this point during the 20 years of observation. So what we are measuring the adding to the normal processes, because of course there are a lot of sources, atmospheric fronts, clouds, and so on, which produce the heat. But with this procedure of processing, we are able to detect exactly what is produced by the radon. And if we are talking about the cosmic rays, it is they have very low variability. It is a very stable flux. And what we are calculating, we calculate the derivative to the growth of the radiation, and from this we also discriminate the stable processes from the transient processes which happens during earthquake preparation.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Sebastian. I'm from the LaRouche organization from France. And actually I got 2 questions, one for Sky Shields, and another one for Mr. Pulinets. The first one is related to what you, not directly on what you said, Sky, but on the subject of this question of liberalism that we dealt this morning. We talked about that, about the fact that now we have to develop a youth movement which is the highest, which goes on the highest level on scientific development and artistic development. And Lynn went on this question of the social pressure we have, and among the young especially, and boomer generation, but it was dealing on the fact that it was most effective on the young people. And I just wanted to know what a young guy, who worked a lot on those questions, but could say about that, and on the work you're doing on this kind of frontier, scientific frontier with, Vernadsky and also the Curies. So, because it's very interesting for the French people just to also to understand what you understand about this question of liberalism, and for the young and others. And for Mr. Pulinets, I just had a question which was, striking in my mind with the videos, the interview you did on the website, the LaRouche website, with Daniel Grasnac, because I understand that, this question of cosmic radiations is coming from a huge activity of not solar activity, but stellar activities, and it's very present in the arms of the galaxy. But I was wondering, I heard in your interview that when we are in the arm of a galaxy, actually, it's like something which is active, like an umbrella of other cosmic rays, which is coming from extragalactic domain. It's detailed, but I just wanted to know if you could precise what kind of cosmic radiation we are dealing with when we are talking about this question of the change in the climate and different seismic activities. So that was my questions.
Okay, the first question you will respond. Okay.
I'll say something that came up in discussion a lot. It's come up in discussion a lot over the last few weeks, which is that as a generation, there's a broader problem. We've got a special kind of a manifestation of it, that we do have a funny sort of social interaction that is, it's part of it. You can see, you sense it in kind of a lack of trust. You sense it in I'll invert it positively. If we're going to be successful politically, we've got to have the ability both to provoke trust in the population, a trust in what we're doing, and then to be able to trust in principle and the ability for principle to be able to move other people and be effective in the universe. And that doing that requires a passionate commitment to the idea and the principle. In the same way as you heard Lynn often describe the way the classically trained actor should make themselves completely, you're nothing but the agent of principle. And you leave yourself completely open to manifest manifest the truth that you need to manifest, that you need to be the avenue by which that gets brought into the world. And it demands a certain kind of interaction with people in order to do that, a real openness, a passionate attachment to an idea yourself, and a passionate attachment to the part of other people that's moved by that at the same time. And it's sort of, if you know that, it does define, I think, what the environment needs to be that we want to generate around ourselves in the offices and elsewhere. I mean, one thing that's been clear recently is you don't really know anybody else until you know how their mind works on universal principle. It's why it's really important to have a situation where the people around you, you and your peers, have to hypothesize. Because if somebody's not hypothesizing, you don't know who they are. If somebody's not giving you an honest hypothesis, if somebody's giving you a safe answer to anything, whether it's the right answer or the wrong answer, you have no idea who you're talking to. You've got no way to know who you're talking to. The only time you really have some idea who that person is when they're trying to make, and they're independently trying to undertake a creative act. And when you see that, you've got an ability, when you can start to see somebody struggling with that, again, it matters less whether they're right or wrong in the course of doing it. That you can work out after the fact. That you can get more precision on if you do it. What's more important is that you can actually see somebody taking, not really the risk, but what they perceive as the risk of making a hypothesis, so you can fight it out. You're completely open. In that sense, you're open to criticism. Like we like to, sometimes we wield criticism in a funny way and we call it intervening, but it's not intervening on somebody if you're gonna intervene and then go home. If you're gonna complain about something and then leave, like a real intervention is you're gonna see something all the way through because you're trying to bring out something that's better in the other person you're talking to, and you're not gonna allow them to become a victim to something that's attached to them that's not them. And so in that sense, you've got a real passionate love and a desire to be in the muck with the other person, but that's not different than a passionate attachment to universal principle and ideas, because that's the only level on which you can engage. That's the only level on which you can have that kind of interaction with somebody else, either someone else in the movement, but also anybody else in the population. That's the kind of thought process that they're waiting to see from you. That's the kind of thing that triggers, I would say that's what triggers the human in other human beings. And we've got an ability to do that if we take, yes, the subject areas we're talking about in the physical science and how that's informed by classical composition, but again, only if we do that honestly, if you do that in the most kind of honest, open possible way, where you're letting every single part of you be developed. I mean, the closest example I have for it is what we have to do often in the singing, the quality of mind that's required to communicate an idea using your own voice. It really ends up having to be it ends up being a very, I don't know how to say, denuding experience, having to kind of like bury yourself, and also in doing it in collaboration with other of your peers. If it's done correctly, it's an exercise in how you should handle everything. And if we can approach the scientific questions that way, and in general the whole strategic questions we need to deal with in that way, you will be able to tap into the part of the population and ourselves that's actually immortal. Because you say, well, what is it? Most of everything else, we've made the point, every animal species on the planet, in the history of the planet, the vast majority of them have gone extinct, and all of them most likely are going to go extinct. The only thing that stays throughout that entire process of change is the process, is the principle of change that governs that development. That stays, that does never go extinct. We are a unique phenomenon on the planet and in the universe in that we can attach ourselves personally to that kind of a principle. You can emotionally attach yourself to that thing that doesn't go extinct. And as a result, first off, in order to make huge evolutionary changes, we don't have to kill off other human beings. All we have to do is kill off bad ideas. If you kill off bad ideas, we can evolve. Every other animal has their form and organism attached to those ideas that go and die. But connected to that is the fact that also, to the extent that you're attached to an idea of that quality, of that magnitude, you're also expressing, you're attaching yourself to your own individual immortality. And I'd say that's almost like that's the single thing. That's the only thing that we're doing, and everything else, every other predicate is some predicated way to get at that question of immortality. That's what you're looking for in yourself, and that's what we're looking for in the objective universe. That quality of mind, that principle of creativity, and we want to latch onto that and never let go.
Okay, was a question about arms. Yes, you understand correctly. When the solar system in the arm, there is more dense matter which make obstacles for the galactic cosmic rays, and the less galactic cosmic rays reach the surface of our planet. Okay?
Hallo, ich habe eine Frage an Herrn Pulinets.
I have a question for Mr. Pulinets. I did some research in the internet, and I struck on something called HARP, H-A-A-R-P. What do you think of this? Because it is said that they were able, through the expulsion of rays, to create earthquakes or to change the climate.
Okay, from the very beginning of my career, there was very popular so-called active experiments. And there were experiments with beams of electrons emitted from board of the rockets, of the satellites. And one of the directions of these active experiments were the heating facilities which were installed all over the world. There are heating facilities in Peru, in United States, there was in France, now no more exist in Russia, and the recent one which was built and very huge with high effective power, it is HARP facility. But this facility is created to modify the ionosphere. It is completely different thing. It cannot, this beam of HF waves, which is emitted by HARP, does not effectively interact with atmosphere. It interacts with the higher levels in the altitude starting from 100 kilometers. It is the ionosphere, and they create the spot, heated spot in the ionosphere, modify the density and temperature, create some instabilities, but these effects are very local. I don't believe in any way that HARP is able to produce the climate change. The only thing that can produce HARP with a specific modulation of this beam, it is stimulate the magnetic substorms or storms and create the artificial precipitation of particles. It is possible, and some people say that it is possible to program because the particles of radioactive belts are drifting in longitude. It is possible to program the point where the precipitation takes place. Maybe it could be stimulated by HARP, but up to now I have not heard, there were no publication of such effects. But to make the modification of climate is impossible by HARP. And okay, I have plenty of friends of Russians who went to United States, who directly work with HARP and make experiments. I have friends who, Russians who went to HARP and make their own experiments. So we know more or less what is happening there. So I don't believe in such things.
Or if there are more questions, then we should somehow summarize them or bundle them.
Okay. Hello? Is it hearable? Okay. So I have a question both to Sky and Mr. Pulinets. I'm a member of the LaRouche movement, and I've been studying what you both do for quite time. And so I think what Sky said is that the biosphere is a different physical universe. Everything that corresponds to living processes is a different state of the universe, and this biosphere is interacting with interacting with cosmic processes in our universe. And also the thing that you have a multi-angle approach to earthquakes. This is what referring to Mr. Pulinets, that because most geologists that we've been talking with, they say that this has only to do with kinematic, like plates that are crashing against each other, like earthquakes, and has nothing to do with solar storms or cosmic weather. So my question is, or my thinking was that talking about these things, if we now in 21st century or going further want to understand our universe in a proper way and discover the physical laws of the universe, we have actually to take a scientific revolution where you take every discipline that is of science, be it chemistry or biology or even earthquake prediction. You have to take everything from a cosmic angle. So my question is, how would this scientific revolution look like? What steps do we have to do to revolutionize our educational system, our method of science?
All right. Well, the first, I mean, I guess it'll be more clear in the write-up on it. There's one, in the very first document that Vernadsky writes on the states of space question, his problems of biogeochemistry. It's a lecture that he gives, which is supposed to be on the 15th anniversary of the October Revolution. It takes place on that, but then instead of talking about that, he just talks about the states of space and his work on that, which he says began in 1916. But he says, well, look, he says there's two options here. Either there's these completely distinct states of space, or what's possible is that you've got some quality of the universe as a whole which is expressing that kind of handedness, and somehow life is uniquely sensitive to being able to detect it. Because he is clear, remember the very first thing he begins with is saying that he recognizes that life is a fundamental principle. It's not some separate principle that's added in the universe. You don't have a universe there with life in it. He says that life is a pervasive principle, and you see it singularized in living organisms. But then he also says the same thing about mind. He says that mind is something that's pervasive and underlies everything the abiotic, but it also underlies everything living, and you see it singularized in the human individual. You see the singular expression of it. But the actual thing itself is something that's pervasive. And he has a nice way of expressing it. At one point, he's doing a critique of Hermann Weyl, because Hermann Weyl has this description of the human individual as being some kind of thing that observes the universe. You say, oh, you're this observer, and you're looking out of your little box, you're looking out of your window at the universe and trying to describe it. And he says, look, that's not true. Human economic and human scientific activity is a part of the universe. It changes the universe. It's in the universe. So you're not looking out at something else. You're looking sort of in a mirror at your own activity. And what you're describing and what you're acting on and what's doing the acting is, in a sense, the same thing. The way he words that is he says the human individual is inseparable from the noosphere. You can't pluck a person out of the noosphere and have them be some separate thing. You're a singularity that's formed in that process. You are the active, willful part of the anti-entropic development of the universe. But now, in the course of doing that, when you're looking at different phenomena, you're seeing different principles at play. And depending on the principle you're seeing at play, you're going to define what seems to be all these things that you now recognize. Once you have this other view, you recognize that, okay, well, what's real there is the principle. That's what's got to govern it. You can see that primary is this idea of mind, and then everything else comes under that. If that's true, then everything else has got to be a shadow of those principles. So the thing you thought you called space at first, the thing you thought you were calling time, the thing you thought you were calling matter, that Weyl has as these separate things, those have to somehow all be a shadow of principle. Now what that means is that in each case that every time you're looking at a different principle in play, you're going to find a different thing that you define as your space, your time, your matter. And the example is what Einstein does when he says, okay, well, instead of taking an absolute space and time of Newton, I'm going to instead look at the properties of light, what I know about the constancy of the speed of light from electrodynamics. And I'm going to use that as my definition of a physical process that will tell me what time is. And he does it, and you get a whole other thing for space and time, completely distinct, with completely different physical properties than you had with Newton. But that's a very specific principle he's looking at play. Vernadsky looks at that. Vernadsky does look at what Einstein does, and he says, well, look, he says, this is something that is unique. The description you have here, though, is that specific description that you get in relativity is something that's unique to the abiotic. If I look at other principles of change now, I'm going to look at the principles of change that you see connected to the creativity that's manifest both in the biological, but that biological creativity as it's sort of a subsidiary reflection of the more fundamental cognitive creativity. If I look at those processes, what do I now project backwards as space and time? And you get something very different. One, I'll only kind of mention it here. We can have some more discussion maybe later. Vernadsky's got his own thoughts on it, but for our own purposes, it's significant too to think of one of our colleagues in Percival was sending this around, Michel Fuchs, sending around Schiller's discussion of creative cognitive time from the ascetical letters. And if you look, he's got an amazing description of what time is for the human individual, which subsumes a lot of what I was discussing about what the character of human immortality is. If you say, well, this human immortality is a real property of the human individual, but it's also a real phenomenon in the universe. It's not something that pokes in from outside the universe. It's a real property of the universe we live in. Then you have to say, what has to be the ontological character of that universe to permit that as being everything that you know as the properties of a creative, active human being. And Schiller's got a perfect discussion there, like around the 13th letter, of what cognitive time has to be. And if you look, you'll start to realize that what he describes there ontologically is almost exactly the sort of thing. If you compare what Schiller discusses there to what everybody runs up against with all the problems around quantum mechanics and things, all the experiments they can't describe, and I think you'll realize that what he's working on there is the resolution for all those problems in physics. And so that, I think, is closer to what Vernadsky is saying. You're not dealing with separate universes here, but you're dealing with separate principles that are at play. These distinct sort of nested principles that are at play, and the way they manifest themselves is very specific. But when you pull all the way back and you look at the universe as a whole, you realize the whole process is creative, and it's got, somehow in the whole, you've got something, that same kind of creative development that mirrors the individual cognitive creative process, something that we are in the image of.
Okay, your question relates to the thing what I was told in the end of my presentation, that scientists should have more wide scope of their knowledge. And according to the effects of the solar activity on the earthquakes, probably you remember in 1989 what happened in the Quebec province in Canada. The transformer of the power station was melted by the current which was induced in the ground by the geomagnetic storm. There are measured the currents from tens to hundreds ampere in the pipelines which are inside the earth during geomagnetic storms. That's why now the pipelines are doing with insulators do not permit such currents pass through the pipeline, because they initiate corrosion of the metal. So, and your friend geologist should know that there is magnetotelluric sounding, which is measuring of the currents by the different probes during geomagnetic storms, and these currents are induced within the Earth's crust, and by this sounding they study the internal structure under the ground. And just geologists do this. So, and probably you know Evgeny Velikhov. It is academician of the Russian Academy of Sciences. He is well known. He was a director of the Kurchatak Atomic Power Institute. He was in delegation of Gorbachev in many treatings. So probably you know and heard his family name. So they made also the active experiments in the Tajikistan with the special installations. They induced the huge currents in the Earth's crust, and from 1 to 5 days after these experiments, the seismic activity in the region increased. So we have experimental proof that the currents induced in the Earth's crust can stimulate the earthquake. There are statistical indications that there is a relationship between the solar activity and seismic activity. I can agree only that this effect is not studied to the end. There is no clear physical mechanism, but at least approach and way of thinking and how it happens give you the numbers of the currents which are induced by the strong geomagnetic storms in the Earth's crust. And Earth's crust is conducting media, and this current can produce the additional deformation of the crust, which could be the trigger of the earthquake. When the earthquake is already prepared and you need something very small adding, so this current and deformation created by this current can be the trigger. But we need to study more carefully this. Thank you.
Okay, I would suggest that we take now all the questions which are there, but answer them tomorrow, so that we have a dialogue which continues over, over 2 days. And since the whole evening of the Musikabend is very beautiful and is actually, a continuation of this discussion, and then we have the culture panel in the afternoon, so there is plenty of more discussion time tomorrow. So I would suggest that people who want to say something now should say it, but only your question should be answered.
Hi, so I have a question for Mr. Pulinets, and especially about the declaration of one of your colleagues, that is Francesco Biaggi, that said that he and some Japanese guys were able to have elements to forecast the Japanese earthquake like 10 days before. And I'm very curious to know what you think about this declaration.
I know Professor Biaggi very well, and it is connected with the effect of the propagation of very low frequency waves from these navigational transmitters. I showed you one picture of this. So there are several transmitters all over the world and several receivers. And if the radio path is passing over the epicentral area, these processes of the radon emission and changing of the parameters of atmosphere change the conductivity over this area. And radio wave passing over this experience the changes of this conductivity and changes its amplitude and phase. As concerns 10 days before, it is very difficult to say because there were very strong foreshocks. For example, of 9th of March, or some shocks were earlier. So he cannot say definitely that it was exactly the precursor of the main shock. Usually you can observe the foreshocks were also very strong, something like 7.1, something like this. So it is possible they have seen, we see the strongest anomaly 3 days before the earthquake.
Questions right away, I can assure you we'll have tomorrow afternoon lots of time to discuss more. So I have to make 2 announcements now. One is that everybody should please leave their translation equipment at the end of the hall, because they have to be recharged tonight. Otherwise you can't hear anything tomorrow. And otherwise I really want to make sure that you really come to this beautiful Musikabend which we are going to have, because we will have some really unbelievable highlights, and I can assure you, you will hear not only some masterwork from various people from the youth movement, some professional musicians, but we have one very special thing, and that is you will hear one of the best soprano voices which are on this planet right now. So you would be angry to yourself for the rest of your life if you missed this.